Well, in this episode, we are thrilled to welcome Garrett Brown. He is the resident short-term rental expert at BiggerPockets.
Luckily, I found BiggerPockets, and that relationship really helped spark a lot of things within me to start my investing journey. Now I own 4 short-term rentals, and I manage our co-host 4 others.
From $50,000 floods to surprise 4 and below star reviews, Garrett Brown shares how to stay positive in the face of hosting challenges.
This is on to the next one at that point. That's the thing with hospitality is you can't dwell on little things like that because they're going to happen. You're not going to be able to please. You're never going to be able to please everybody. I mean, in working in restaurants as a waiter for years, it was very quickly obvious I was a very good waiter. I was a very, very good waiter. You could do everything in your power, and there's still going to be people out there that were like, "This was just not good," and then that's fine. You know, as long as once you realize that and accept it, life's going to become a little bit easier in the hospitality world for you.
Hear about some of the unexpected lessons that Garrett has learned from his time at BiggerPockets that shifted his own approach to short-term rentals.
If you're wanting to do something, the fear that you don't know how to do it and the fear that you are going to, no one's going to like it and all these things, you just have to put those to the side and just start.
My name is Jason Muth. I'm a 30-time Airbnb superhost. I worked in the media business for over 25 years, and in 2016, I started my Chapter 2 through short-term rentals. Since then, we've welcomed over 5,000 guests and their furry friends to all of our properties, and we are here to show you how to make a smart stay. Now, here's Garrett Brown from BiggerPockets. All right, Rory, super excited once again to have someone from the BiggerPockets family on Smart Stay show. You know, we never take it for granted whenever we have these esteemed BiggerPockets colleagues. Can we call them colleagues, Rory? Do you think? What do you think?
I'd love to. I mean, I get a little starstruck whenever I speak to the BiggerPockets folks. They do such a nice job putting out the content and everything. So it's an honor always to speak to them.
Let's welcome Garrett Brown to the Smart Stay show. Garrett, what's going on?
Not much. I appreciate y'all having me. I'm super excited to chop shop, and anything short-term rentals and real estate's always up my alley, and I'm definitely excited.
We traded some messages on BiggerPockets. You started this newsletter called Bigger Stays a number of months ago, I believe. And, I think that when it randomly hit my inbox once, I was like, what is this thing? And like the tone was cool. The articles were interesting. The sponsor Hospitable is a big, partner of ours. Like, we love using Hospitable's tools. We just had someone from Hospitable talking about direct bookings on our podcast. And I reached out to you as I do, because I have no shame in reaching out to strangers. And I'm like, I don't know who you are, but like, this is kind of cool, like what you're doing. And we got talking and I'm like, oh man, we've had other BiggerPockets people on this podcast. We're big fans. Rory and I have just, talked many, many times about how BiggerPockets has changed our lives as it has many other people in this world. And here we are, Garrett, welcoming yet another person from the BP family onto Smart Stay show. And you are the perfect guest for this show because you are the short-term rental expert, right?
Yep, that is what they call me. Working on keeping that title official.
All right, so give us your quick background as to who you are, why we're talking to you, like how BP started. We'll talk about your short-term rentals yourself in just a little bit, but that's a good intro.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from Houston, Texas originally. I graduated from the University of Houston in the hotel and restaurant management program. It's the Hilton College over there. So I've always had a hospitality background, worked in hotels and restaurants for years. About 8 years ago, I got my real estate license. I was a real estate agent. All I thought of was, buying a house, selling a house. And once I had an investor call me one day and he goes, "Hey," and I didn't know the person. He goes, "Hey, do you work with investors at all?" I did not. And I was like, "Sure. Yeah, absolutely, dude." Completely lying through my teeth. Instantly got on Google, searched real estate investors. Luckily, I found BiggerPockets, and that relationship really helped spark a lot of things within me to start my investing journey. Now I own 4 short-term rentals, and I manage our co-host 4 others while working at BiggerPockets full-time as their resident short-term rental expert. So it's been a pretty fun ride. I still have my real estate license, but now I am full-fledged on short-term rentals, and I see what the capabilities are for people just like us every day out there.
Rory, you've worked with agents before that have that moment that strikes them where they say, I should work with investors instead of people buying single family homes as their primary residence. Like, Rory, what do you think caused Garrett to have that moment as someone in this world too?
I mean, he saw an opportunity. Two things go on there for real estate agents who are looking for something. One, the quality of clients. A lot of people who are primary home buyers might buy a home and stay in it 20, 25 years, and then you're not really going to get a lot of repeat business out of them. Some friends and family referrals, but it's not the same thing as having an investor who might purchase a property, once a year. That's a great client to have. But also, I've always encouraged real estate agents to adopt niches. I mean, there are so many real estate agents who, when asked what can they do or where do they work, they'll say, "Oh, I'll go anywhere, everywhere, and I'll do anything." And that's really not a good answer. There's no way to build a lot of expertise with that. So diving into a niche, whether it's short-term rentals or really anything else you can think of, is a way to really build your credibility and put together a business that makes sense, and so you can provide real value to your clients.
So Garrett landed at BiggerPockets earlier this year. Were you in Cancun this year, right before the hurricane?
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. We were
Okay.
there, Category 5 hurricane during BPCon. But luckily, it avoided all of us, and it ended up being a great event. We were super happy.
Was that your first time going, or have you been before?
That was my first time actually going. So it was. I've obviously been a avid Bigger Pockets fan for years, but that was actually my first time attending BPCon, and I'm upset that I hadn't before. So the
Yeah.
opportunity was in front of me, and sometimes you don't realize, what kind of things are actually out there until you kind of just put yourself out there and explore a little more.
So I always wanted to go, and I worked for a company, for many, many years. And when that job ended, I had the opportunity to go to BPCon. So I went in 2022 to San
Nice.
Diego, and I met a couple of the folks. I mean, all the BP personalities are celebrities at this event. I remember walking to a elevator, and Henry Washington was in there by himself, and I looked at him and I said, how does it feel to be like incredibly famous right here, and then you go home to like your life of normalcy? And he just laughed, and he knew exactly what it was. And we have a really funny, we've had Ziana McIntyre on this podcast, who I
Hmm.
spent some time with out in Colorado, um, talking shop, short-term rentals and medium rentals for like a couple days in a row. We have a common friend, so we spent some time together, and
Nice.
she wrote a great book on medium-term rentals. I saw her speak at
Hmm.
BPCon. We've had Zach Lemaster on this podcast, who's a
Hmm.
big sponsor of Bigger Pockets with Rent to
Hmm.
Retirement. He's a good dude. But my favorite story, except for this one, of course, Garrett, is running into Dave Meyer at a restaurant here in Newburyport, Massachusetts, when he was on his way to his wedding up in
Wow.
Maine. Like literally. And I of course went up to him. I'm like, you don't know who I am, but I met you at BPCon, and I just want to say hi. And why are you here in Newburyport? And we got talking, and he eventually made it on the podcast because I ask
Nice.
people like that. And he is a good dude. And I saw your episode that you did with him recently on
Hmm.
on the was it on the main Bigger Pockets podcast?
Yep, I did a few of those recently with Dave. We did one, me and Dave, and then we also had one that just came out, me, Dave, and James Daynard, that we kind of compare long-term rentals to flips to short-term rentals, what we kind of look for when we're doing new investments and cash-on-cash returns and things like that. So it was pretty cool experience. Always chop and shop with some of the legends in that kind of space. So they're brilliant minds. I learned so much every time I talk to Dave. It's incredible.
So, but before we hear about your investments, like tell us how you got into this Bigger Pockets family.
So I'm a big advocate for always putting yourself, like I was kind of saying even earlier with the BP con. I have always been an advocate for putting yourself out there, and because I have a kind of a motto that closed mouths don't get fed. So as an agent and me starting up my short-term rental business, I was making content on YouTube. I was making content on Instagram. I was not very good at it at first, but after years of practice, I eventually started to kind of catch my wave with it. And I finally started getting some traction. The role opened up at Bigger Pockets that they were in need of a short-term rental expert to kind of build out that vertical a little more. And it kind of aligned perfectly. But because of all those years that I was putting in, basically, I call it like training now. Like I was training myself for this type of role. And there's years where I was discouraged, like, oh, I'm putting all this effort in. I'm not getting anything back from it. And is anybody caring about my content? Like, why am I even doing this? But I learned two things when I got really good with my short-term rental content. So like my I know we'll talk about this more too, but my short-term rentals, we do about 70% direct booking now because I've took years to learn on the content side. It took me 5 or 6 years to get good with it. But that content, the learning from that and also putting it into my own, like anytime I would do anything, and like I was doing day in the life vlogs of me doing short-term rentals. I was doing, data, like as I'm crunching data onto investments, I was recording it, making content about it. that just putting that out there eventually led me into my, like almost a dream job for me, because I wasn't worried about, like, oh, what are people going to think? Is this even going to work? Like, I was just, all I wanted to do was try to bring out some, education for people and value for people, while at the same time working on my own skills. And I saw the bigger picture that, no pun intended, I saw the bigger picture that would eventually lead me to something. And it luckily was BiggerPockets, which I'm a huge fan of. So I've always been a big advocate for people to just, if you're wanting to do something, the fear that you don't know how to do it, and the fear that you are gonna, no one's gonna like it, and all these things, you just have to put those to the side and just start. Because a lot of the times, you starting is the hardest point of entry for something that may change your life down the line, and you may not even see it while you're doing it, because you're kind of, in the forest and you can't really see too far out of it. But if you're just constantly working on your craft, there's a lot of things that are going to be able to help you, and you don't know what part of your life it's going to help. I would have never thought I would have been in this role when I, started to being a real estate agent and things like that. I was just like, let me try to learn some new things. And the way the world works and where it takes you, it's always amazing. But I'm just a big fan of just starting and not worrying about, how you don't know anything that you're doing.
What's fascinating in that story is, my hunch is 5 years ago, when you put a camera on yourself and just started talking into it and recording, you probably didn't have the goal, maybe you did, of 70% direct bookings at short-term rentals and a role at BiggerPockets. But the story that you told said, as you just got better and more comfortable and put yourself out there and didn't really care what the results were, you hope that you help some people, good things like that happen. It's not being lucky, it's putting yourself into lots of situations where luck can be a factor, so therefore you're lucky. And when we did this podcast many years ago, we launched this as the Real Estate Law Podcast and have since transitioned into Smart Stay Show. Rory and I were doing this as a way of building specifically his credibility on the law side. And then when I started doing this full time a few years ago, it served both of us. And, there's a lot of people online that are lurkers, right? Like, they lurk, they don't comment,
Hmm.
they don't like, they don't, but they're there and they're watching it. And Rory, I mean, how often have we had people mention what they see about us online? Like, when we go to meetups, I just went to a couple months ago, and like, a friend of mine, Ben, he came up and said, "Oh, I love your stuff that you see online." And somebody else, the gallery owner that, was hosting it, mentioned the flood that we had at our place. Like, people that I didn't think saw what was going on. And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry that I'm clogging up your feed." Like, I'm sorry that my face is all over the place. And I don't think that, Rory, we're not doing this intentionally, but we are kind of doing it intentionally because it's really helped build our credibility. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, it is a little disconcerting when people know these things and you don't expect it. I haven't gotten used to yet, but it feels really good just knowing that people are listening and taking the time to to hear what we have to say. We put a lot of work into this. We have excellent guests who bring their stories to us, and it feels really good knowing that people actually are listening to us, and that we're adding some value to their day. And it's amazing how many people out there who don't think are engaged in the real estate space really are, and they're looking at it. They just may be at different stages than we are.
I've
Garrett,
always said that. I've always said that one of my favorite quotes is that luck is just preparation and when preparation and opportunity, meet together. And so for all the years that you've been preparing, that opportunity, when it comes, you're going to be ready for it. And as you're kind of seeing, as you've met more people and bigger things are starting to happen there, this is going to be like, it's going to be another day in in life for you, that you're just like, oh, it's a walk in the park. I do this all the time. People that don't start, and when they do get that opportunity, that's when they fumble, because they haven't been ready to just have that big moment come for them.
so we know that Bigger Stays is a relatively new component of BiggerPockets, right? When did that start?
I think about mid-July. I got brought on right around then, about a week later. And then so we started around there, and we have a big vertical coming on a lot of different things within it. So we're pretty excited.
So since BPCon is, I think it's usually October,
Mhm.
you had a couple months runway. Like, were you recognized there? Did people come up to you and say, "Hey, you're that short-term rental guy"?
I had definitely a few people, because I also I'd make a lot of content in general just for the BiggerPockets Instagram and socials and things. So a lot of people would be like, I recognize you from somewhere. Like you kind of like, I think I saw you. I was like, yeah, you probably saw me reading an ad or something, like on BiggerPockets too. But a lot of people did recognize me from the short term rental space. And I agree with y'all. Like I had a lot of people that recognized me from outside of my own just YouTube channel from before and things that I used to do. And I never thought anybody was really listening. I only had a few thousand subscribers and things. And it amazes you what the people that are lurking, like as you called it, that are actually out there that would never make content, but they crave more desirable content and more real content. That's one thing I've always tried to be with I've never sold a mastermind. I've never sold a course. I've never, like I've always been, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm doing, what I'm dealing with, that somebody that is actively doing this. And you're going to see my trials and tribulations. That's one thing that I've always been against with some masterminds. The people are rock stars. They do crush it. The value in the education, that's up to the person. But some masterminds, I know some people that don't even own a short-term rental and they're selling short-term rental masterminds. And it's like, I'm not against teaching the proportion, but I also think you need to be pretty invested in the day to day of knowing how these type of operations really run. It's not, it's not as easy as just Googling it and then making a spreadsheet for people. There's a lot of intricacies and nuances that change year over year in this. So
Couldn't agree more. I'll shout out the mastermind that I'm in, which is STR Secrets, that Mike Sodrin runs. And
mm-hmm.
I know there's no direct connection between BiggerPockets and STR Secrets, but like they're all the real deal. I've been in it for 2.5 years. Not paid to say this. Like I took a risk, joined it, met amazing people who were actually in the trenches doing it, and
Mm-hmm.
they changed systems, mindset, everything. Um, one thing that you do well that I don't think I do well, or maybe all this stuff is stuck on my camera somewhere. I don't know what to do with it. But if you're in a situation at your property where something happened, like a hammock fell, a hot tub is green, like there's bugs running all over the place. Is it in your nature to grab your camera and document like your shock and your moment and you're solving it? It's not in my nature to do that. It's in my nature to just get it done and be like, oh man, I should have filmed that.
Yeah. I actually used to have the same mindset, but then I started realizing, because I really started like analyzing like what content, especially, everybody can say what they want about TikTok, but TikTok's algorithm is by far the most superior to tell you if your content is entertaining or like is going to catch on a little bit. Every video that I've ever put up that did well on TikTok did well on other platforms, not vice versa. I've had some that did well on Instagram for different reasons and not as well on TikTok. But the thing I saw on TikTok was the story times, and I don't want to say sensationalizing things like that, but I realized that those moments are actually what people are going to A, continue watching, and B, learn something from in the moment. I used to just get it done, but once I realized like, okay, this guest asked me for something kind of, odd, or this randomly happened at my property, or I had great guests, and like I realized that this is something that if you document it in like a real-time view, people are going to just be just so enamored by that, because they want to see like what the day in the life is of a person that runs these type of things. And we actually do it. Like we are hands-on in our operation. And so people, because there's all these stereotypes basically of Airbnb hosts, like we just sit back and we make so much money and we're ruining communities and all these things. And it's like, it's actually the opposite. We're providing amazing stays. We're employing local people. We're bringing tourists to certain areas that are spending tax dollars. We're paying occupancy taxes. Like there's so many positives to short-term rentals in specific areas. And if we can highlight like that, not all things are bad in Airbnbs, and not all, and actually hosts actually care. I think that's going to bring the trends that we're looking for because I get a lot of guests that are on my TikTok that are just like, I wish we had an Airbnb host like this, or, I stayed at an Airbnb and the host didn't do that, but we love your approach on things. So I think giving that, giving that full picture of things, actually how they happen and how we can solve them, it helps play into the guests, feeling more easy booking Airbnbs, and doesn't have that stereotype that, we got to go back to a hotel. And it helps hosts realize that, hey, you can actually do this. There's going to be a few bumps in the road, but these are just some of the simple things that may happen. And as long as you figure out a solution, that's all you're going to need to do in most of the things in the short-term rental world. So that type of content has actually been my best performing recently, and I'm going to like triple down on it going forward.
My hunch is you have a degree of positivity to everything that hits you. It just because you're really highlighting the good with short-term rentals. And I think a lot of people get into this space because they saved enough nickels and dimes to buy a second home, and now they got to figure out how to pay the mortgage on that home, or they inherited something. Then of course there's not quite nefarious, but like the dollar signs in your head where you want to scale up to 50 million properties and have all these doors. Most people are somewhere in between, closer to the earlier part. But when you have your first property, you don't exactly know the good that short-term rentals do for communities, and you just highlighted like 10 different things right there.
Yeah, I've always been a person that problems are going to always arise. I'm always just like, how can we solve it, and how can we make everybody in the situation happy? Like that kind of comes from my hospitality background, working in restaurants and being in hotels for years. That there's going to be problems coming up every day. How can we solve this that everybody walks away and feels like the situation turned out fine? I've had nightmare situations, but there's always a solution to it. I've had just some of the wildest instances at my Airbnbs, but there's always a solution to it. Even in the moment you're like, what on earth do I do right now? If you just process some things and figure it out, most of the time it isn't the problems, or you're going to eventually look back and be like, that really wasn't as big of a deal as I thought. Cause then you'll hit a real big problem and you'll be like, oh, okay. Like a $50,000 flood, like I've had before or something. You're like, okay, that's a big problem that I can be a little upset about, but I still have to find a solution in the end. That's all you can do most of the time.
Hey, Rory, should we raise him our flood from the $50,000?
Maybe. Actually, I wanted to touch on something you were talking about there, or just highlight something in your background. You come from the hospitality space, and when we talk about short-term rentals, it's really a marriage between real estate investing and hospitality. And I think, or just feel maybe since we came from the real estate side, that there are a lot of real estate investors who don't necessarily understand that or adopt that mindset. So when I see your content and the community that you're creating, there is a lot more of that positivity because, you're incented or you're excited to provide guests with great stays. But there are a lot of other forums out there, particularly on Facebook or other areas, where you see a lot of short-term rental owners complaining about some things that are pretty mundane. Oh, I had this one guest do this, and it's just a venting forum for a lot of people. I don't find that particularly helpful, and I'm sure you don't either. But talk about that a little bit. How did your hospitality background really inform how you approach short-term rentals?
You hit it on the head too when you said it's a marriage between real estate and hospitality. I tell people all the time, you have to win on both fronts. You have to win when you acquire the real estate, or however, even if you're not acquiring and you're co-hosting or something, you have to win on that front. But then you also have to go into it always thinking about the guest experience, because that is what's going to separate you from. Gone are the days when you can just put up an air mattress in a room, or put up your aunt's house that that you have, and use the decorations that were already in there. It's all about now where Airbnb is beating hotels tremendously is the experience stay. And when I say experience, people, and even I have a lot of unique short-term rentals, but I also have just some plain Jane, clean cut, nice design ones that do really well. And when I say experience, the hospitality is a part of that. Like we write, for example, like we'll write welcome cards for every guest. It'd be super small. It'd be like a sentence. We sign it, say we can't, with their name. People love to see their names and they love to hear their names. Write their name down, sign it. We can't wait to have you here. We send another thing we do is we send automated messages like about 7 or 8 p.m. the night somebody checks in. Hey, how was your check-in? Is everything going good? Guests always think however you put the verbiage in it, guests are going to think it's you. They instantly think it's me talking. And so oh, things are great, Garrett. Thanks for asking. They love that check-in. And then the thing with that is if you check in and there's an issue, you can solve it right then and avoid the worst part of being a short-term rental host is when you get bad reviews. That's probably what everybody dreads. And besides damage to your property, bad reviews are probably the two most common things I hear, hosts complain about. But you can mitigate both by doing the upfront work of vetting your guests through using hospitable systems like their ad hoc system where they do guest verification, and also getting in front of any bad review that might come. And, to touch on the point about people venting on Facebook groups, I think that's just people in general too, is they always, there's something they want to talk about and vent about, and they think that that's the safe space to do it, which is probably safer than going off on going at your guest or something like that. But I think from the hospitality side, it's been driven in my brain from the beginning. Like my aunt, she owned a cooking business that I used to work in. I've worked in the hotels, and every single time you would hear like the managers or general managers, if a problem would come up, they would never be flustered and go, oh, what do we do now? They would just instantly go, okay, um, let's take this, do that, you go hook that up and solve that. It was because what else are you going to do if you dwell on the problem and it's just sitting there? Like, you're going to be in a worse situation than you were in. If you can figure out and have checklists, this is why having systems is so important. And one thing, and STR Secrets and Mike and them, they're awesome over there. They're an example of people that are actually doing this and have been doing it full time. Their systems and processes, just from all the content I've seen from them and other things like that, that is where they excel. And they're like, that's the type of thing that people really need to understand when you're building out all these things that could go wrong. If you think of everything and have a document that would have, what you do in this situation, every time something comes up, you're going to be able to, not every time, let me correct that, 99.9% of the time something comes up, you're going to be able to go, okay, this is what we should do in this situation. And then if it's that 0.1% where you have no clue what to do, you add it to your systems and processes, and you take the time and you go, okay, we're not going to freak out. Let's just figure out what we can do, and then we'll cry a little bit on our own just a little later or something when we get it solved. But right now we have an issue to solve, and we just need to take it from there and figure it out. But people just love to vent too, and I get it from a host. Like, I was kind of the same way. I'm upset when somebody leaves me a 4-star review for no reason and they love the place, and it's like, why would you do that? There's no way to really solve that because you probably did everything you could, and those things will happen. So that's one thing I do love about Facebook groups. In the end, is there's going to be some complaining, but it's at least in a somewhat safe space, because a lot of times we're like, yeah, I understand. I got a 4-star review and they said my place was the best they ever stayed in too. I don't get it, So it's I've been there, but yeah, it's just been driven in my brain to, anytime something goes wrong, let's see what we can do to make this better for whoever's experiencing the problem.
We had a 4-star recently and they loved it. They wanted to come back next year. And I'm like, dude, like what was that?
Yeah. All
What's
the
your
time.
star rating? You want to share it?
I think 4.95, I think, somewhere around
There
there.
you go. We got a
Yeah, I have.
4.95 too.
Yeah. So the same though. Like, I think I've only had one 3-star before that was nothing, that, one of those things you couldn't control. And I've had a couple that were 4 stars, same exact thing. They were like, awesome stay, love to come back, this was great, 4 stars. And it's like, thank you for staying with us. I don't know why you thought that, but thank you. Next time we'll try to earn your 5th star. It's one of those things that I'll never make sense of it, but it's just on to the next one at that point. That's the thing with hospitality, is you can't dwell on little things like that, because they're going to happen. You're not going to be able to please. You're never going to be able to please everybody. I mean, in working in restaurants as a waiter for years, it was very quickly obvious I was a very good waiter. Is one thing. I was a very, very good waiter. You could do everything in your power, and there's still going to be people out there that were like, this was just not good, and that's fine. As long as once you realize that and accept it, life's going to become a little bit easier in the hospitality world for you.
I ref flag football in the spring and the fall in an adult league that I used to play in for a long time. And Rory knows, he used to play in this league actually. And, the call you miss is the one you remember. That's the one everyone remembers, and you got to let it go. You just kind of have to move on. And even if you think you missed it, you miss it. It's the play everyone's going to remember. So I've learned to do that as well. And I try not to dwell too much over guest feedback that either, I just say, all right, you're right, I'm wrong, or that's ridiculous, and I just move on.
Yeah.
What's your team like? Like, are you working with VAs? Are you working with a lot of people on the ground? Like, are you
So
everything?
yep, a little bit of everything, especially now that I've gotten further at BiggerPockets and pretty much, work here full time, obviously. I have 2 VAs that they switch shifts. One of them works 9 to 5, basically Monday through Thursday, and I think Saturday, and the other one works the nighttime shift. We also use a lot of AI too now. Like, we use a few different AI tools, answering guest messages. I don't want to shout any particular AI company out right now for different reasons. But there are some pretty cool AI tools out there. There's a little, like, I don't know what other word to use besides, I guess, like wonky features to them still. Like I'm not fully on board with the AI answering only. Like there's a few things I let my VAs pretty much handle, and you can turn off the AIs at certain times. But sometimes people, they just want what's called like a digital hug. So is what I kind of call it. So if you can get an instant message back, if they send a message at 10 p.m. like, hey, we don't want to, we check out at XYZ time or something tomorrow, and then the AI will answer it, and they feel heard in that moment. And that sometimes is enough to just like, they're like, oh wow, they answer so quickly and their guest service is so amazing. But I don't want to fully endorse AI answers yet, because there's been a few times where it didn't work out in my favor for a few reasons. But I used a lot of VAs, and then I have a full cleaning team built out at most of my glam sites, and the ones I co-host, we have the same thing. I have a cleaning team and a handyman maintenance team, and then I have a spreadsheet of all my subcontractors, contractors that the VAs can tap into, or I personally know myself that if something specific goes wrong, my cleaning team is trained, goes back to the systems and processes. If your cleaning team isn't trained in the way that a short-term rental needs to be cleaned, with the attention to details and the pictures and all these other things that come along with it, besides different than a residential clean, you're going to make sure to have those processes in place. So if they show up and, hey, a pipe is leaking under the sink, what do you do? And it's, they don't call me and freak out. Let the VA know. The VA will send a message to the plumber that is in the contract that I list as my first one. That plumber will handle it, send the invoice if they need to. Most of these times I always, when I'm buying a place or even co-hosting, I am boots on the ground for at least a week or two, probably in that area, setting it up, meeting people. And if I'm new to the area, I try out 3 or 4 different cleaners. Like I will stay in the place or something for like a week, kind of add some dirty things here and there. I'll have a different cleaner come in each day, and then I'll be testing them on little things. I'll leave some crumbs under the couch or something like that. I'll bring my dog with me and see, how well they clean it. And I always find the best cleaners by basically giving them a trial run. Who showed up on time? Who understood everything I was asking for? Who went that extra mile? Like who folded the toilet paper, like at the end of it, and put a little stamp on it. Like little things like that always stuck out to me. And I'll always pay more for a really, really good cleaner and a really good handyman, because that's going to save you money in the end. If you're trying to be cheap on your VAs or cheap on your cleaners, you're going to lose more money in the end, because you're going to get bad reviews. You're going to have to refund people. There's going to be so many things that pop up that you're not expecting. And when you pay your cleaners well, they're going to go the extra mile for you. My cleaners help out with things sometimes that they don't even necessarily have to, but they do, because they're so happy to be, happy to be a part of this process. They like working with somebody that can understand their trials and tribulations and make their life easier, but then also at the same time really value them. So I'm a big fan of building out your teams and processes, but then also treating them really well, and do not go cheap in those areas. That is not the place you want to save money in. I've seen people do it, and it every single time they lose more money than it, way more harm than it does good.
That's such a cool idea, to stay in a place for a number of days. If you're co-hosting it, get a different cleaner in every day. Do a little bit of messy stuff every day. Get a different cleaner in and see how they all do. What a cool test. Are you building out multiple markets to co-host? Because I know you have these glamping sites. I see these geodomes all over your Instagram. We don't have a lot of those up here in the Northeast, as you know, because you spent some time up here during college. But tell us about kind of the portfolio that you have. Like, what do you own? Where are you co-hosting? What are you looking to build out, like, for your non-BP role?
So most of the ones that I own are in 2 different lake areas north of Houston. We've kind of really honed in on that and built a really big brand in the area called Cameron Ranch Glamping. We're one of the first luxury glamping sites in Houston, which was kind of surprising when I built it, because it's the 3rd or 4th largest city in the country. And then my co-hosting, I actually, using my content is how I've brought on co-hosting people. I have one in Broken Bow. I have a couple more in the similar area in the lake, and then I also have one in downtown Houston. But all of those co-hosting leads, I didn't even want to get into co-hosting, really. I think it's an amazing opportunity for everybody, especially if you don't have the money to purchase a place or anything like that. If you can learn those steps to be a good co-host, that is one of the easiest barriers to entry that can, lead you to a path of success. But I found a lot of them from putting content out. I don't pay for any leads. I'm not a salesperson. That's why I didn't like being an agent. Like, I don't cold call anybody. I don't send, Airbnb messages and try to find new people, which if I did, I'm not against any of that. I think that's all awesome, but just me personally doesn't fit my time and personality. But the thing that fit my personality is just making a bunch of really good content about how I market my properties, how I, use Google ads, how I use Instagram, how I have my operations set up. Making content constantly about that brings in a flow of, I don't want to say a free flow because you have to spend your time and some other things on the actual content, but the funnel that I've been getting from that and just the amount of people that are interested in working with me because of that has been amazing. There's sometimes even with my content, like I don't even co-host, but because I make all this content and have my Airbnb referral link, I've, made a few thousand extra bucks just from bringing on 10, 11 people, onto the Airbnb platform because they're raising how much they pay people just to bring on the platform. I think they even doubled it recently. I saw, or it's like $900 a person now or something. Like it used to be like 600. It was like 500. It's gradually been increasing. So just doing those types of things, that's all supplemental income that you get from helping people, and you're also building your brand. And at the same time, the more content you're making, the more you're researching and trying to get better knowledge and educate yourself. I've learned so many things just because I go in a tangent of like, oh, I want to learn how to do this and educate people on it. And then I learn so much, and then I'm able to implement it in my own, businesses. And at the same time, it's the type of stuff that is going to always, and it's going to bring in the funnel that you want, but it's also going to already establish that trust that you don't have to like, hey, this is why I'm the perfect person for you. Like, I promise I'll be good for you. You've already established that with them. They are coming to you because they have seen what you can bring to the table. And so I'm a huge fan of making content of what you're good at, and, recording your life. Basically, if you're doing it and putting out the content, people are going to want to see that. And that's where you're able to draw in that people that are looking, they don't want to get into the content space and all that, and they may have, they may not have time to, they may have a great property or, something somewhere, and they found you and they're like, this is the person I want to use. I don't even need to talk further with them or, interview other people. I can tell this is where it's at. And that's how I've brought on all four of my co-host clients.
I'm sure a lot of why you were brought on to Bigger Pockets to launch Bigger Stays and be the expert of short-term rentals was all that content you've been developing and all the experience that you have. However, what have you taken from the BP community that you've applied to the work that you do outside of it, or what learnings have you had from in the other direction?
So I've been a serial entrepreneur pretty much my whole life. So this is my first time within a company, and the organization and the attention to detail on analytics and, like they also are very, very big on the customer experience and the customer, like how the customer journey is what the word I'm looking for. They're very big on the customer journey, which lines up a lot with us, but they're also into analytics a lot, which me before I used to, oh, okay, like this makes sense, this, and I wasn't as big of an analytics guy. But now that I'm really getting honed in on all the tools that are out there for, different entrepreneurs to use and host and investors, it's really brought a new perspective to me of like where you can where people fail is they don't really analyze what they've been doing. And I was kind of, guilty of that before too. Like I would look at my numbers and kind of figure out like, and that's why even when we talked about the TikTok things earlier, I really started diving into those numbers. Like, what is the average view duration? How long are, like, where are people clicking off? What part of the story are people deciding to swipe away from? And I really started analyzing like how the consumer's mind of sorts. And so now I've been able to apply that into my own short-term rental businesses. I've been able to apply that into my own type of content to make better content overall for everybody else, because I'm able to see what people actually want. And you think you know what people want to hear and want to talk about, but a lot of times the content I make, I'll go, oh, this is gonna do well, or I know this is gonna teach a lot of people. They may not be interested in it, and you keep doing it, and you're like, why is nobody paying attention to this? And then you do one video and it does well, But if you don't analyze like what was different on that in real analytics, you're probably going to keep spinning your wheels more. But once I've actually like really dove into it, I see now like what is going to make success for all different types of my businesses. And so the analytics side has just been, it's huge to dive into. And a lot of people aren't like numbers people like that, but I strongly encourage anybody that does whatever business you have, like take moments and really figure how can you make what analytics can you really analyze and get into a spreadsheet and really track that are going to improve your performance that you haven't done before. Because I guarantee you there's a few that are within your business that will make it grow tremendously if you just take the time to set up that process where you're like every Sunday I'm looking at my, if you have a website, how many people are viewing my website compared to last month? Or are you running Google ads? Like, where are they clicking out? What's the most popular search term within my community and things like that? If you take the time to analyze these numbers that seem kind of boring, they're actually the secret sauce to like growing your business. And I've seen it just from a corporate standpoint now, and it's been eye opening for me in a great way.
We could like legit talk for 7 hours. I seriously, the world I lived in before this was digital marketing. That was my job, to help sell and interpret digital marketing campaigns. So
Nice.
it's like you're hitting all the buttons where I'm like, oh, this is my guy. Like I got to talk to Garrett longer, but I, in respect of your time and the listeners' time, like we're certainly not going to be talking for 5 hours in this podcast, although we very much could. I could tell you're a chatty guy like I am.
Absolutely.
Let me ask one last question before we get going. Rory, do you want to ask a question, or do you have anything last for Garrett, or should I just throw in the last one?
I do want to ask one thing. I want to ask you to make a prediction a little bit. So, what are some of the trends that you see in the short-term rental market, and what do you expect to see next year?
So I crunch data all the time now, and there's two massive things that I'm seeing in the market. Because I'm not even going to touch the experiences or unique stays and experiences are the way, because that is definitely number one. Like I'm definitely very, very high on that mountain. But the two things that I've seen a lot are rise. I think people, and I know I get pushback from this from some of the bigger STR people when I talk to them. I think that a lot of the big national parks are oversaturated, and I think the sweet spot is the rising. I call them rising hotspots, where it's even like a New River Gorge is one that is pretty big, and Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas, where there's enough rise in tourist traction that it's going to be something that is going to continue to bring tourists to the area, but the median price in the area is still doable for the average investor. Like even, if you think of the Smoky Mountains and even Broken Bow and other places like that, the barrier to entry to get in there is so high now. And I don't want to say over, I don't like using the word oversaturated, because it's hard to oversaturate the short-term rental market, especially like the good host, but not many people are going to be able to get into $1 million home that's going to actually bring in the revenue you need. But there's tons of markets out there that I use something called the 60-30-10 rule, where it's if you're 60 minutes from a major, I say a major city, 500,000 residents or more, you always are going to have some type of flow of tourists you can get. If you're 30 minutes from some type of regional attraction, a state park, or a national park is amazing, but you don't even have to be by a national park. Some type of regional attraction that are going to bring people to it. And then you're 10 minutes away from a gas station or, a Dollar General or something. That way, some people will buy land and they'll be 2 hours away from everything. And that's logistically almost impossible to run. But if you're 60 minutes from something, 60-30-10, you will always have at least a good chance of bringing in constant tourists. So I call them the rising hotspots, because there's always everybody's going to move away from the Smoky Mountains. People go once or twice maybe to the Smoky Mountains, but some of these closer regional attractions, they're going to year over year. I have families that come visit the same place over and over, year after year, in these state parks, because it's right around the corner from them and it's not that far. And then I think the other major trend within hospitality too is the extra services you can add. This is where our revenue increases tremendously, because we sell packages on top of so we sell a romantic package, which is, flower, rose petals, balloons, roses, LED lights, all that in our place. You also can book a birthday package. You can book a mobile massage. I built out all those systems, and we make 50% profit on every single one of those. And we've had people book a stay, and it happens especially with direct booking, because you can have them upsell directly within the website. We've increased our profit. I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say 15 or 16% in the last few months by ramping up our packages. And I built the systems now that my cleaners are able to handle that. They're making extra income. We're making 50% profit on every single one. And the guest experience is just through the roof, because these are type of things that not many other people are offering. And then it also, having a very highly decorated place when they show up, our Instagram tags and like people like posting on their stories as they come in, tagging our social media profile, has went through the roof too as well, because now people will see these super creative decorated places that we got paid to decorate. And also, like, we're also able to market that. We can take a quick video and, hey, you can come book a stay and have a romantic getaway, and we'll handle all the decorations for you. Those two trends, if you can find the right rising hotspot and supplement it with different packages and other add-ons to it, that's the secret sauce to making a really profitable short-term rental in this space, and not having to, you don't need 20-30 properties when you're making XYZ profit compared to the next person, because you're offering those extra things that other people can't. And then how you don't have to raise your prices just to hit that. People are so worried about how, pricing people out. Just give them extra benefits that you can figure out, where your profits are going to be able to come into as well.
All right, so now we got to have you back on to talk about packages at some point next year. So Garrett, you
Anytime.
just brought yourself back on the podcast next year before knowing it. But what a fantastic idea! I have some ideas about that as well. We all have these long lists of ideas, and you try to figure out what things you want to implement that will have the biggest bang for the buck. To add on a 50% margin product is certainly a no-brainer, and of course the logistical elements to that are what are spinning in my head. And Rory's probably thinking, well, what are the legal implications about having a masseuse in your place? But those are let's have a limitless mindset here. Let's not think about those limiting beliefs right now, because that's immediately where my brain goes.
Make sure your masseuse has insurance. That's one of your first ones.
Yeah. We'll leave it at that. So you are Garrett Brown RE on Instagram. And if you're not subscribed to Bigger Stays right now and you're listening to this podcast, you're missing out. So please go subscribe on BiggerPockets, interact with Garrett. You seem like a guy that will reach back out to people if they send you direct messages. So
absolutely.
We really appreciate all the time that you've given us here on this podcast. And, hopefully a couple of people who are listening or watching will become new followers of yours.
Absolutely.
Rory, where can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more about the work you're doing?
Come find me at my law firm. It's Urban Village Legal, urbanvillagelegal.com. Or if you can't remember that, just go to rorygill.com and to find me that way.
All right. And if you want to be a guest in the podcast, smartstayshow.com is where we have all the episodes in our lead form. Fill it out, and we'll be back in touch. We want 5-star reviews, so if you like this, give us 5-star, drop a comment, and we will see you in the next episode. Garrett, thank you so much once again. It's been a pleasure having you.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure. Thank y'all.